Hi, my dear friend. I'm so happy you're here with me. If this is your first visit, please hit that subscribe button and share this video with your loved ones. It really helps me out. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing from all of you. All right, let's jump right in. Dylan Carter had always believed he understood Ophelia in a way no one else could. Their 5-year marriage had carried them through joys, challenges, and hopes for the future they hadn't yet realized. The memory of his proposal remained vivid, the way her face brightened, her whispered yes lingering in his mind. At that point, he had been convinced they were perfectly in tune. That evening they sat together at the kitchen table, the faint background hum of the TV filling the quiet between them. It was then that Ophelia, with a tone as casual as if she were mentioning a grocery list, made a remark that froze Dylan in place. "I'm going to dinner with a colleague on Saturday," she said, her voice disturbingly light. Dylan stared at her, waiting for an explanation, some detail that would give this comment context. But she simply buttered another slice of bread, her demeanor calm, as if her words had been of no consequence. For a moment, Dylan questioned whether he had heard her correctly, or if this was a poorly timed attempt at humor. Yet her steadfast focus on her plate, her refusal to meet his gaze, sent a ripple of unease through him. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice composed, almost unnervingly so. "What do you mean?" he asked, sounding far more controlled than he felt. When Ophelia did glance up, there was something deliberate in her expression, a quiet expectation, as though she'd been waiting for precisely this reaction. "It's just dinner," she answered breezily. "Nothing about us is changing. I love you. This doesn't mean anything." Dylan held her gaze, scrutinizing her face for any crack in her composure. But she remained poised, as if this exchange was entirely ordinary. His fork rested untouched. Whatever hunger he had felt earlier was gone. His heart was pounding, but he was determined to keep that hidden. He wouldn't grant her that victory. It felt as if Ophelia anticipated an outburst, raised voices, accusations, demands for answers. But Dylan would not comply. He prided himself on his ability to master his emotions when it mattered most. Drawing a deep breath, he offered a faint, almost dismissive smile. "All right," he replied coolly, lifting his water glass and taking a slow, deliberate sip. He caught a subtle shift in her breathing, not overt, but enough for him to notice, and it confirmed what he suspected. She wasn't seeking his acceptance. She was looking for a reaction. The silence between them stretched uncomfortably long. While Ophelia lowered her gaze again, Dylan watched her steadily. After a moment, he spoke with an air of casual detachment. "Maybe I should try that too. See what it's like to have dinner with someone else." That was when Ophelia's mask slipped ever so slightly. Her eyes rose, no longer carrying the same polished ease, but betraying a flicker of uncertainty. Dylan felt a sharp sense of satisfaction as he noticed a slight tremor in the hand holding her fork. She blinked quickly, as if struggling to process what he'd just said. This wasn't the outcome she had anticipated. "You've met someone?" she asked, trying to sound nonchalant. Maintaining his faint smile, Dylan gave a small shrug. "There's a woman I talked to at the gym. Thought it might be interesting to go out sometime." At that, he saw her complexion pale just a shade. The balance between them had shifted, and he hadn't even begun to press the advantage. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. For an instant, Dylan caught the fracture in her facade. The hesitation, the way her fork hovered in midair, the slight widening of her eyes as she tried to comprehend this unexpected twist. He reclined slightly in his chair, maintaining a posture of ease, as though none of this carried any weight for him. But inside, a cool, calculating satisfaction surged. He was watching her experience the same unease she had inflicted on him only moments earlier. "I see," she murmured at last, her voice subdued, clearly trying to regain control. Her eyes drifted from his, her fingers fidgeting with her food, but Dylan noticed the subtle trembling of her leg beneath the table, a detail she couldn't quite conceal. He knew her too well not to recognize that she was rattled, even if she worked hard to appear composed. Why was she suddenly so unsettled? If she truly believed a dinner with a colleague was harmless, why did the idea of him doing the same seemed to disturb her so deeply. In that moment, Dylan understood. This was a test. But it was no longer one she controlled. "Is that an issue?" he asked lightly, his tone unchanging. Ophelia forced a small laugh and shook her head. "Of course not. I just didn't expect that from you." "Fascinating," he replied, folding his arms as he maintained that same cool, knowing smile. Ophelia hadn't seen that response coming from Dylan. His reaction blindsided her entirely. This time she didn't brush it off with laughter. His words landed like a sharp edge, cutting through the casual air she had worked so hard to maintain. Straightening her posture, she lifted her chin, adopting a mask of false nonchalance. "So, who exactly is this woman you know from the gym?" she asked, her voice deliberately light, though the question carried weight. A subtle, almost secret smile crossed Dylan's lips. He'd expected her curiosity and found it amusing that she made no effort to disguise it. "Does it matter?" he replied evenly, dabbing the corners of his mouth with a napkin. "It doesn't change anything between us, so I don't see why we should get into the details." Ophelia let out a quick, brittle laugh, but tension flickered in her expression, betraying her discomfort. "Is this actually serious? Are you really seeing her?" She pushed further. Dylan tilted his head slightly, studying her closely, as if attempting to read her inner thoughts. "Weren't you the one who said we should keep things open, explore?" he reminded her gently. She parted her lips as if to answer, but no sound came. For the first time that night, she found herself speechless. A dense silence settled between them, the atmosphere growing heavier by the second. The confidence she had carried into the conversation dissolved rapidly, slipping from her grasp. Dylan remained silent, sensing he had already achieved what he wanted. Confirmation that Ophelia had never truly expected him to embrace the very arrangement she had proposed. And, more profoundly, that she was now confronting the idea that she could lose something she had believed was securely hers. Without offering another word, Dylan drained his water, rose from his seat, and looked down at her. "Good night, Ophelia," he said simply. She stayed seated, her gaze distant and unfocused as she watched him leave the kitchen and vanish from sight. In that moment, Dylan recognized that the balance between them had completely shifted. He now held all the power. In the days that followed, their dynamic took on a distinctly different tone. The house, once lively with small talk and familiar routines, became heavy with silences that felt more oppressive than any spoken argument. Dylan carried on as if unaffected, following his usual schedule, coming and going as before, yet he moved through life with a lightness, as if freed from an invisible weight. It took Ophelia some time to register this transformation. At first, she convinced herself it was fleeting, a ploy, perhaps, designed to provoke a reaction from her, to test her boundaries. But he never reverted to old habits. On the contrary, his actions became more unpredictable. The first true jolt of discomfort struck her on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday morning. As she sipped her coffee, she noticed Dylan standing before the hallway mirror, carefully adjusting his shirt collar. It was a familiar gesture, but something about his demeanor had changed. His movements were deliberate, his expression self-assured. She watched as he smoothed his hair, scrutinized his reflection, then checked his phone, a slight smile playing on his lips at the message he read. A wave of anxiety surged through Ophelia, her heartbeat quickening as she realized that for the first time she felt something unexpected toward Dylan. Fear. The fear that she was losing him. Though she did her best to maintain her composure as the day wore on, that image, Dylan's subtle transformation, kept replaying in her mind. Who was writing to him? Had he truly found someone else? That evening, as they sat together on the couch, she ventured a casual remark, her tone airy but probing. "You seem happier these days." Dylan didn't turn his head. His gaze remained fixed on the television, though a faint smile tugged at his lips. He murmured. Crossing her legs, she tried for an offhand tone. "Almost as though you're keeping busy with something new." This time, he met her eyes, his look steady, almost analytical, as though weighing the intent behind her words. "I guess I'm just using my time more wisely," he said carefully. His response sent a chill through Ophelia, stirring an unease deep inside her. In the days that followed, she began watching him more closely. His phone seemed to light up with notifications more frequently. Some mornings he left early to go running. One evening he came home from work, went straight to the shower, and hummed a cheerful tune she didn't recognize, a sound unfamiliar, almost foreign to their shared routines. Then came Saturday, a day Ophelia had already planned to meet a colleague, when Dylan, casually eating breakfast, remarked, "I'm going out tonight." Ophelia froze, coffee cup paused midair. "Oh, really?" she said, striving to sound indifferent. "With the woman from the gym?" The words felt like a punch to her gut. She opened her mouth, scrambling for something to say, a way to take control, but no words came. Her mind spun wildly, searching for a way to change course, to pull things back to how they had been. But there was no path back anymore. Dylan had fully accepted the conditions Ophelia herself had proposed, but for the first time, she felt completely unready to confront what that acceptance entailed. That evening, Ophelia stayed behind, alone in the quiet house. Dylan left unhurriedly, wearing a shirt she didn't even recognize. The scent of his cologne lingered faintly in the air long after the front door closed behind him. He offered no explanations, asked no questions about how she would spend her evening, and, most strikingly, appeared utterly indifferent to the date she was supposedly on that night. In that instant, a sharp, breath-stealing realization struck Ophelia. She never ended up meeting her colleague for dinner. The colleague texted her repeatedly, wondering if their plans were still in place, but she didn't reply to a single message. How could she? Her thoughts were completely consumed by Dylan. She drifted from room to room, making a hollow attempt at convincing herself none of it was important. But as the night wore on, the anxiety inside her only grew heavier. Almost without realizing it, she kept tapping through apps on her phone, pretending to look for distraction while knowing exactly what she was doing. Waiting for a message. Waiting for him to come home early. Waiting for all of this to unravel and for Dylan to declare that none of it had meant anything. But he didn't return early. No message appeared. There was no sign of regret from him. That was when despair truly began to take hold. Ophelia found herself curled up on the couch, the television on, but showing something she couldn't even register. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door, her ears attuned to the sound of keys that never came. When Dylan finally arrived home, it was after 3 in the morning. He stepped inside with an air of quiet ease, moving slowly, not offering apologies or explanations. The moment he saw her, it was obvious he hadn't expected her to still be awake. But there she was, and in that moment, something deep inside her fractured. "How was your night?" she asked, her voice thinner than she intended, sounding almost fragile. Dylan slipped off his coat, placed it neatly over the back of a chair, and met her gaze with a calm, expressionless look he'd carried for days. "It was fine," he replied simply. Those 3 casual words cut through Ophelia like a blade of ice. Panic rushed into her chest. She wanted to question him, press for details, beg him to admit that it had all meant nothing, that it had been a mistake. But the words refused to come. Dylan offered no justification. He wasn't hiding anything. And perhaps that was the most unbearable part. Without another word, he crossed the living room and disappeared down the hallway into their bedroom, as if their conversation had ended. Ophelia sat perfectly still, her heartbeat thudding so loudly it seemed to echo in her skull. Her intention had been to provoke Dylan, to challenge him, to see if he would react with jealousy or doubt. But now, sitting in that silence, she desperately wished this had all just been a harmless test. Only this time, Dylan wasn't playing. The next morning, Ophelia awoke feeling something foreign, an overwhelming raw fear. Fear that the man across from her at the kitchen table was no longer the Dylan she thought she knew. Fear that she had crossed a line she could never retreat from. She rose slowly, her limbs leaden with the weight of everything she had endured the night before. When she walked into the kitchen, Dylan sat there, quietly sipping his coffee, completely composed, as if nothing at all had happened. The sight of him, so at ease and detached, twisted inside her. He seemed like a stranger. He didn't say a word as she entered, not even glancing up from his phone as he scrolled and drank from his mug. "You got home late last night," she said, trying to make the words sound light, almost casual. Dylan's only response was a slight shrug. "Yeah." That indifferent answer shook her even more. Ophelia sat down across from him, watching him closely, hoping for some sign of hesitation, some indication that this was all still a game they were playing. But Dylan's demeanor felt genuinely distant, and that realization chilled her to her core. "Dylan," she said softly, her voice quivering. She hated how weak she sounded. "What are we doing?" At last, he lifted his gaze to hers, studying her for a few long moments, as if deciding whether replying was even worth the effort. Then, in a voice unnervingly calm, he replied, "You tell me, wasn't this what you wanted?" Her stomach dropped, as though the ground beneath her had vanished. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it," she faltered. Dylan let out a laugh, but it wasn't warm. It was a laugh filled with clarity, almost cold in its precision. "And what did you expect?" he asked, his tone cool and measured. "That I'd plead with you to change your mind?" She parted her lips to speak, but he continued before she could form a reply. "I've had time to think about this, Ophelia, to really consider what your suggestion means, what it says about us." Her chest constricted painfully. "Dylan, I made a mistake," she whispered. His gaze remained steady. "Yes," he replied flatly. "You did." A heavy silence settled between them, thick with everything that no longer needed to be said. Ophelia wanted to cry out that she regretted it all, that she should never have proposed any of this. But deep down, she already knew. It was too late. Dylan had already made up his mind. He stood slowly, reaching for his mug and rinsing it under the faucet with deliberate care, as though calmly completing the final act of an ordinary morning ritual. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was cold, detached, and his words struck her like a blow. "Thank you for showing me who you really are." Without a backward glance, he walked out of the kitchen, his steps steady and unyielding. A chill rippled down Ophelia's back, holding her frozen in place, anchored to her chair, as a suffocating dread steadily filled her chest. Several long moments dragged by before she found the will to rise and drift into the bedroom. There, perfectly arranged on the table, lay a neat pile of papers, the divorce documents, already signed. In that instant, Ophelia felt as if her entire reality had shattered. Her intention had only been to provoke Dylan, to push his boundaries, but instead, she had destroyed everything, and lost him. She slumped against the bedroom doorway just as Dylan pulled a suitcase from the closet. The harsh rasp of the zipper slicing through the thick silence made her heart constrict. The truth was inescapable now. This was the end, final and irrevocable. A wave of panic surged through her as she stepped forward, desperate to reclaim even a fragment of control. "Dylan, please," she murmured, her voice trembling as she forced a brittle, pleading smile. "We've let this get out of hand. I can move past what happened with that woman. Let's just forget it all. If you can forgive what I said about your colleague, I'll forgive your mistake. We can start over." Dylan froze, his grip tightening on the suitcase handle. When his gaze locked with hers, he didn't see a woman afraid of losing the man she loved. He saw someone terrified of surrendering her grip on the situation. A dry, bitter laugh slipped from his lips. "I don't need your forgiveness, Ophelia," he replied softly. "These last few days have shown me something. I finally understand that I'm worth more than this." Without another word, he snapped the suitcase shut, grabbed his keys, and strode out, never looking back. The muted click of the door closing was the last sound before an all-consuming silence settled over the room, dense, absolute, and unbearable. This story has come to an end. What's your opinion? Share it in the comments, my friend. And if you liked this story, check out other exciting videos on my channel. I'll say goodbye until the next video. See you.